This is Progress Canada, presented by Lightbulb Narrative. Today we're joined by Ontario Young Liberal President Palwashah Ali.
Thanks so much for joining me.
Of course, happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So we are going to talk about a number of different things today, but they're all going to be focused on youth politics, which I think is an under-discussed issue, I think, probably on podcasts about politics. And, generally, young people don't really appear on podcasts about politics. So I'm very happy that you have joined me today. So let's go back to the beginning. Let's talk about how you got involved. I'm always really, really interested in people's origin stories in politics. I think they're really, really interesting. I'm always surprised how people get involved. It's never how you think. What was your story for getting involved? And why did you want to get involved in politics?
Yeah, well, first off, what you mentioned about young people not being on podcasts enough or in this space, I agree. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I'm looking forward to chatting about my favorite thing, politics. But it's my origin story is a little untraditional. I grew up very, very shy. I was the most introverted and shy kid really in my entire family. I couldn't hold a conversation. Sometimes my parents would even wonder if I wasn't even willing to, speak to anyone. They were pretty worried. Eventually I was like maybe 12, 13. And I got to a point where I realized, okay, I, have a voice and I should probably learn how to use it. And so in the 2015 election, I started just following my mom around when she was canvassing a couple of times. But then in 2019, I decided what better way to get over my anxiety than go knock on strangers' doors and ask them what their political opinions were. And then, one thing led to another, and here I am today, but a lot happened in between. I remember after knocking my first door, I thought, what a mistake, and why would I ever do this again. But shout out to my local candidate in Thornhill at the time, who their staff, who made me feel really comfortable and showed me that it was worth coming back and that I had a voice, etc. So yeah, I just ended up continuing to volunteer locally in Thornhill, and then only really got involved with the Young Liberals a few years ago. I started working at, I worked for MPP Shamji, I worked at LCSB for a little bit. And so just went from, knocking one door to getting very, very involved in the nitty gritty of the party. And I wouldn't have had it any other way.
I want to talk a bit about that because I consider myself an introvert. Most people I know do not consider me an introvert.
Same here. People look at me and they're like, "No, of course not." But I'm, it takes all my energy to, not.
Well, and this is the thing, right? They always talk about where does your energy come from? I get energy from people, but you're very familiar with experience. You go to a convention, you're on your feet 16, 18 hours a day, whatever it is, for 2-3 days. And then afterwards, I don't want to talk to anybody for a week. And that's how I know you're an introvert. I can put it on. I call it my retail personality. I did 10 years in retail before I entered politics. And you really get used to being like, oh God, there's a stranger, I have to talk to them. And you just get over that hump. And I think, for all those out there listening to this interview who are also introverts and are like, I couldn't possibly do politics, I very much felt the same way. I can turn it on when I need to. I feel like I reflect other people's energy. But for me, the idea of just walking up to a stranger's door is horrifying. Calling someone up out of the blue, having an unpre-planned conversation where I don't know exactly what I'm going to be talking about, unlike these podcasts, that is not a fun experience. And I think politics, for all the other things it is a really great tool for helping you get over that, for putting you into a zone of discomfort where you just have to figure it out. I'm assuming you've had the same experience.
Oh, absolutely. I remember the first Young Liberal, I sound like I'm, really old saying this, but
96, and that was so long ago.
Just a few years ago. I'm still a Young Liberal. But I remember the first, it was a holiday social of some sort, and some, friend of mine had invited me. And, at this point, I, again, had just worked on 2019, 2021 in volunteer capacity, very local in Thornhill, and not really getting outside of local politics much. So, a friend invited me, and I remember standing outside that social for 10 minutes, terrified of walking in because I didn't know anyone there. I felt very out of my element. And it took a lot for me, to not just walk away from that. And I'm really glad I didn't, because once I went in, I found people who were like-minded, who shared similar views as me, who also understood and could tell that I was a little introverted, and tried to find ways to bring me in, which I'm really grateful for, because now I try to do that at anytime I'm at an event. And you find people who aren't in conversations, and that just naturally happens. But bringing folks in, whether it's literally in the moment in our conversation or into our movement in general, I think goes a much longer way than we think.
Yeah, I like that point about finding the person in the room that isn't talking to anybody, because even as an introvert, it gives you a task, right? Like you have to go, oh, that's the thing I need to go do right now. Okay, I can figure it out.
Yeah.
And then you brought that person into the process, and that really is how you grow a political movement, is by actually just talking to the people around you. How do you go from that to president of the Ontario Young Liberals? Because that seems like a really big jump from I'm at this event, I don't want to talk to anybody, to now I am chief spokesperson for the youth wing of a political party.
Yeah, that is a really good question. Honestly, I don't really know when the when the kind of shift was in my chemistry to think, I could, I guess, represent Young Liberals. But it really did start with that one event, and then I got more involved on the U of T campus in our club. A few of us had restarted that, and then eventually I became president, and so I got to work with the OIL a little bit more, and see kind of the opportunity that the OIL has. And I mean, for me, I would always just kind of hear stories at any convention or any sort of party event where someone in the room or multiple people in the room would say, when I was a young liberal, 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, it used to be like this. And it really made me realize, how different things had become after 2018, between our change of government then, but also the pandemic. And so I really saw that the OIL, I think, was kind of struggling still to get back up on its feet. And that obviously takes time. And so, yeah, I just, when in about 2024, this was after the leadership race, when I got very involved and met a lot of young liberals as well across the province, was when I thought I would try to throw my name in the ring. I started talking to people and kind of getting a sense of where folks were at, and got a team of folks together who I will forever be grateful for. They were, our team was some former or existing OIL executives, some new ones, and really getting the trust of that group was what helped me decide that I would run to be president.
So you've brought up a question I do want to ask, but I'm going to ask a different question first, and then I'm just trying to keep in my mind that I want to ask it. Why should people join a party's youth wing? What kind of stuff do they get to do as members? What is the experience like for, a member of a youth wing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think every youth wing is a little bit different. And I think it also depends on when you join the youth wing and whether, you're in government or not, or third party. I'm lucky to have been president now one term when we didn't have party status, and now when we do again. So it's been really nice to see kind of that difference. But I think young people gravitate towards and get involved in youth wings because they want to feel heard. And because we want to have a voice at the table, we want to find a community that we can relate to. I think it's great to always be, the only young person in the room, or have that youth voice at a table with, a bunch of older folks. But I think it's really those tables where we have a lot of youth voices on them, which are youth wings, where we feel the most comfortable and the most heard. The good thing about the OIL is that our age range is from 14 to 25. And so you can get involved with the Young Liberals even if you can't vote. And that really helps because I started kind of getting involved in politics, or the first door I knocked was 3 years before I could vote. And that was because I wanted to be involved in decisions that impacted my life as well. And just because I couldn't exercise, a right to vote yet, doesn't mean that I can't help in other ways, which is through the party's youth wing. So, typically our members can, we can help connect them with election campaigns, whether it's during general elections or the by-elections, or even just getting trained up and getting ready for them. We, do different rallies and petitions, as I'm sure we'll speak about later with OSAP, attending policy conventions or just the general conventions for the party. But also there's a big opportunity to meet with and engage with our caucus. And I think that's really big, especially when we in recent years have had a bit of a smaller caucus than maybe we did pre-2018. Small but mighty caucus that really do, I think, really do enjoy and want to have the opportunity to connect with young people. And I'm very, grateful that we have a very good relationship with them, where we can get a caucus member out to all of our events, and clubs can too. And they're willing to talk to us about policy. They're willing to bring our ideas directly to Queen's Park, which is where, most of the difference is made. And even just from a networking perspective, right? I think it's a really great opportunity. I have met such amazing people in politics, and I've found, honestly, some of my closest friends and my support group through politics too, and that's just come from the amazing people that I've gotten to meet.
Recently, one of the commentators on the Curse of Politics podcast, they had done I think it was at their live event out on the East Coast, and he had been talking about youth politics and, why the Conservatives don't have an official youth wing, because essentially in that party, they very much believe it just sort of shunts those folks to the side. Now, in the Liberal movement and in the NDP movement as well, there are a lot of different groups that represent different groups within the party, and they have like official apparatuses, and they can do different kinds of voting and sponsoring and whatever. So in the Liberal movement, we have seniors, we have women, we have Indigenous, we have rural, we have youth. And what do you think? What do you think about that charge that it sort of just sidelines you from, the big adult table?
Yeah.
I have personally always viewed, because I viewed it obviously from a youth lens as a former advisor to the OAL, but also from a woman's perspective, because I see these organizations as a really great entry point for people to get into politics, because sometimes you don't want to just walk into the meeting where it's all these established, usually white guys who are talking about whatever, and you can't get a word in edgewise. And sure, you want to actually, debate with those people eventually and get things on the table as priorities. But the entry point, I think, is so important for these groups. How important have you found that?
No, I completely agree. I think oftentimes we can kind of look at the commissions or different silos of the party of, okay, if we want to talk about young Liberal pieces, it should happen in the OIL. And while I do agree that the OIL should be leading on all youth pieces, it can't just be us. And, I can't, and I shouldn't be the only person at EC who's, a young Liberal or involved in the party. It's great. We do have some young Liberals working at the party, and who between interns or full-time paid staff who do a fantastic job. And it's really those type of opportunities that, I think that the OIL can support with, of, you can get involved in, as little or as large capacity as you'd like. And we want to be the pathway into the party. We want to see more young Liberals as party staff. We want to see more young Liberals as caucus staff. We want to see more young Liberals on PLAs. That's a big message that I try to give to PLA presidents. I forgot to mention this earlier, but between, I guess, right after the 2022 provincial election, which I worked on in Thornhill, I became the PLA president for a little bit, and it taught me a lot, a whole lot about organizing, especially in a riding like Thornhill, which we haven't held in a while. And I think it was, I'm not saying that necessarily everyone go and become a PLA president, but even just having young voices on a board is very, very helpful. And so I think that's something that myself and all other commissions, we all like to work together to remind folks that, you know, the work that needs to happen to get young people engaged, to get women engaged, to get anyone who's marginalized in our party is not just going to happen within our own silos. And you know, we all agree with each other. When I go to like a women's event, and I see the entire room, or a lot of the room is women, and I'm like, yeah, but we know our struggles. We know our struggles. We agree with them. We know things need to change. The conversation needs to go beyond women, needs to go beyond young liberals, because it will need everyone for us to change the status quo.
I think it's a really good point about the boards and having youth voices on it, because I think we get stuck in this place in politics and the workforce, wherever it is, where we think only experience matters, and we don't understand that there are other ways to gain perspective beyond just experience. And also, young people can have a lot of experience themselves too, like depending on what your life story is, right? Like you can have a very different reality than, you know, even an adult who has gone through a different experience. So I think that's a really important point. One of the ways that we actually help mentor the next generation into these political roles is through something called the summer internship program. So I want to talk about that, because in my day, back when we were in government, that was like the thing. I never got it. But, you know, many other talented people got selected for that. They got to go into summer positions in ministries, at the Caucus Service Bureau, at the party office, and they got a lot of really good hands-on experience about politics and government and things like that. Can you talk about what that internship program looks like today and what people who are going to be enrolled in it are going to be doing this summer?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, in the time when we didn't have party status, which meant we didn't have LCSB for a bit at Queen's Park, the party still did have the internship program. And, you know, it still does now. And it's great that the LCSB is able to hire interns as well. And it's been really great to see, you know, what they've been able to do over the last few years with, you know, bringing in, you know, they are young liberals from different parts of the province with different experiences, with different skill sets to specialize in something. And I've personally seen, you know, some of them go on to continue their career or a part of their career at, you know, at Queen's Park or at the party office, and then launch into other things. And it's a really good way, I think, for you know, for students in the summer while they're still, you know, finishing school, or maybe they're not in school and they still just want a summer opportunity to really get hands-on experience. And unfortunately, obviously, since we don't have, or since we're not in government, there's less opportunities, but there's still very, you know, good quality, I think, positions. So on the party side and LCSB side, they're very supportive of young liberals, and have been in the last, you know, few years that I've been around, at least. And through that, they're able to, you know, lend a hand to the commissions or to the OIL sometimes. And, you know, I know you mentioned this earlier, as a liaison of, you know, of the OIL, we used to have that position, and we don't anymore, which means that, you know, a lot of that work ends up falling on the OIL, which we're more than happy to do, and my board loves doing it, or just generally the party staff. But for example, last year, the party interns really helped us with starting some new clubs, you know, and we spent the summer working with them, alongside them, to reach out to contacts in places where we didn't have young liberal clubs before, and campus clubs, and they were a huge help during the summer for us to be ready for recruitment season, for us to be ready to establish those clubs. And it was great because we were going, I mean, at the time, we obviously didn't know we were going into a leadership year, but you know, now we do have 16 campus clubs, and they're all running and very active and very excited for the leadership race. And so we've had a great relationship working with them, but I've also seen on the Queen's Park side how much you just get to learn too.
So you mentioned leadership, and I do want to spend a little while talking about it, because how could we not? Of course, we are in the middle of that technically. I mean, really, we're at the start. It's a very long leadership, and you guys had something to do with that. So I want to talk about, you know, obviously, The OIL is not to be trifled with in the party. It is actually a very powerful group of people in the party that can throw its weight around when it wants to. And it did in this race. So there was a lot of discussions for a long time about when the race would start, how long it would be, etc. I was personally advocating for it to end in May. Obviously, that was not an opinion shared by the OIL, and I fully understood the reason why. You wanted to be able to organize on campuses. And that's harder to do during end of year exams than, say, start of year rush period. Absolutely. Right? So can you talk about how that all happened and why student outreach is so important, both to the party and this leadership race in particular?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to preface, like I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to show EC the importance of doing November vote and where it would land for the OIL. Also, we had a lot of deliberations, just amongst the OIL as well. We all didn't agree, and that's just the nature of how things are going to go. But it did take a lot of kind of conversations for us to realize like where would be a good point for us to land, and it ended up being November. And I do think that it wasn't just as much as I would love to think that I whipped all those votes for the OIL, I don't think the consideration was just the OIL. To be clear, and we would also not ever want to advocate.
No. Take credit for it.
Well, for us, it was big because September recruitment is a huge time for us to recruit members. Being able to table and Frosh Week, and we have new executives that are elected at the end of the school year, so they're all ready to go for September, is really, really big for us to bring in more members, especially with weighted one member, one vote. It's a lot more important for us to have that opportunity to really drive our membership. I think that was our point for the OIL, but I think that point still stands for the broader party. I think the leadership race can bring obviously it can bring some contentious opinions, but it also starts a lot of really good conversations about what the direction of the party we want to be moving forward. I know we've done it a couple of times, and I know we also want caucus to feel supported. And that was something that we, of course, caucus was a part of the decision as well. And we didn't want to make it, very difficult for them or for John Fraser, who's very graciously done, been our interim leader a couple of times. But it's really about taking the time to organize locally with the commissions, as the party as a whole, to bring in as many people as we can, so that the new leader, when they're elected in November, they can hit the ground running with thousands and thousands of new members.
So I want to talk about the leadership experience from a youth perspective. So historically, this is when a lot of people come into the party, but specifically young people, because unlike older people, they may not have been politically inclined at that point, maybe not old enough at that point the last time a race was had. Now, I know we have them regularly, so maybe they were, but this may be their first opportunity, may not. But, this is usually when there's a new rush of young people coming in. And I even look historically at the changes we have seen in the past. Like I think the David Peterson area is an example of that. We had been out of power for 40 years, and same with the Dalton McGuinty years. Again, you have this refresh that happens on the backs of young people. Like there are obviously other people who come into and see themselves in the party suddenly, but it is largely based on an influx of young people every time when we suddenly have the momentum we need to win an election. So leadership is a really important moment to refill our supporter base and bring in new folks. But it's also a really good opportunity, I think, for young people to get experience in the political process. Like I've always said, politics is one of the few places where you can have no real resume experience that you can jot down on a piece of paper. You can have no real connections. You can have no real automatic in that you might have anywhere else in life, and still be able to get ahead and move ahead quickly, because it is based on largely merit and the work you put in and how you deploy your skills and all that kind of stuff. So let's talk about leadership. Why is this a great time for young people to get involved in, and what kind of skills can they gain and what kind of roles can they play? Because there's a lot of campaign teams and Team Neutral as well that they can participate in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from a campaign team perspective, people should, just to be blunt, people should remember as you mentioned, the power that lies in the OIL, with weighted one member, one vote, and with the 50 points that each campus club gets allocated. Obviously, that is one of the reasons, but I hope not the only reason why leadership camps will try to engage young people, especially on campuses. But I really think that, you can't go wrong, in my opinion, with whether you join a leadership camp or you stay neutral and, and support the party's efforts. There's a lot of work to go around, whether you stay neutral or you join a leadership campaign. I have now done both. I joined a leadership campaign in 2023. My first, actually, OLP experience was the 2020 leadership convention, where the last delegated one. Or sorry, was that the last delegated one? I think so.
Yeah.
2023 was a delegate. Yeah. So last delegate, I caught the tail end of it. Very interesting experience. And I'm glad I was able to do that. But really do appreciate the one member, one vote. And yeah, so when I got involved in those leadership campaigns, and they were with candidates who did not end up becoming the leader. That didn't impact the way that I saw the party or got involved with the party afterwards. I got to help out 2 leadership campaigns in the 2023 campaign, and then I got to join a third one after the election. So I kind of found it to be a win-win situation, and I learned so much. I got the opportunity to understand the politics from across the province. But also this time around, as a member of executive council, I'm deciding to stay neutral and support the party's efforts. And there are a lot of different ways that people need help, whether it's getting involved, at the local level with your PLA, with commissions. For us as the OIL, we are working on developing a strategy for how we're going to really go about organizing for the rest of the leadership campaign. We have a committee of just neutral volunteers on the OIL, with myself included, to really make sure that there are meaningful opportunities for young people to hear from each of the leadership candidates, engage with them, and that we can still drive the work that the OIL needs to do, even despite folks joining leadership camps. So yeah, I think it's really an invaluable experience. And I think it's an experience you don't really get otherwise. It's, when else do we get a very, very direct say in who becomes, the person leading us into the next election, or the person leading our movement. And I really do value the relationships that I built with folks, both times, and knowing that you can be a part of that change, I think, is really meaningful, and will drive young Liberals to get involved.
Appreciate you mentioning the after moment of these races, because of course sometimes I think people get involved and think, oh, my candidate lost, well, okay, there's no point, I shouldn't be involved anymore, or they won't want me to be involved. And that has not been the experience that I have seen. There's usually a place for you with whoever wins, because they want as many people as possible to help win the next election, like from a selfish perspective, but also from a moral growth perspective of the party. I do want to talk about one other way the OIL is weighing in on the race. So you guys have already put out a document that you call Our Generation, Our Ontario. And when I saw it, I was like, this is a really great idea. And it's something that I don't think I have seen in a previous leadership race, at least in all my time I've been involved. So, kudos to you guys for doing that. But it essentially lays out the youth wing's policy priorities for this leadership race. And you've done it, even before any of the candidates had really announced. You put it out there saying like, hey, this is what we need to do. This is what our priorities are. Please engage with this. Can you talk a little bit about that process, how you arrived at the priorities, and what you're hoping from the leadership candidates?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was a project that was really driven by our policy director, Gil Ben. And he, we had pretty early on, as soon as we knew there was a leadership race, we knew that there had to be some way, a concrete way for us to, united way for us to let leadership candidates know what we're fighting for. And we intentionally tried to get ahead of, a lot of whisperers or public kind of campaigning, so that everyone was able to participate, even folks who were planning to choose or wanting to get involved, maybe even if they hadn't chosen a candidate yet. And I mean, it's still kind of early, and some people might still be kind of on the fence of where they're going. And so the idea was for us to sit down and really understand from not only just our board and the experiences that we bring, but also all of our clubs. And we put out it wasn't an open survey for completely open for everyone to fill out. It was a public survey, but our approach was pretty directed, so that we could get each club's perspective, and not only just the executives but the general members as well. And then we took all of our findings and put them in a report, or at least tried to lay them out as best as we could, in 3 different kind of categories: things that were more external policies that we wanted to see. Number 2 was internal policies we wanted to see to strengthen the party and help support the growth of the OIL. And then 3rd was just kind of general advice. And so for that, for the sort of external policy piece, we found that affordability, public education, housing and the rental crisis, healthcare, and OSAP were very, very big needs. And obviously the list could go beyond, and this isn't going to be a one-time thing for us. We're hoping to continue to engage with candidates throughout the leadership race, but also going into the policy convention, which we're very excited about next year, to make sure that there are really good policies on the table driven by young Liberals, for young Liberals. And the way I see it is, housing and healthcare, and the list goes on. So many crises in Ontario, they uniquely impact young people, and I really do think that we need that perspective more at the table. And for OSAP in specifically, we've seen we're very proud of the advocacy that we've been able to do over the last few months with the support of our caucus and the leadership candidates. But it's really, we'll be keeping a very close eye out for what they say over the next couple of months, and let that drive our sort of individual decisions on which way we end up going. But we also really, came together and wanted to provide a list of sort of policies we wanted to see internally, that a new leader bring on. What we're looking for is that they will protect the OIL's constitutional rights. As we've seen kind of in recent years, we've had to fight against some changes, and we've won for the most part, but we don't really want to see a leader going and slashing the OIL's seats on executive council or provincial council rather, or youth pricing, etc. Creating a policy process that ensures youth participation, and really we want them to not think of the OIL as a silo, as we were talking about earlier. We want them to have youth voices on their team, have youth voices driving a lot of the decisions that are being made too. And then the final big piece I'll mention too is supporting youth candidates. We've seen policies like 30 under 30 before. Fly for a while used to be used to support that 30 under 30 piece as well, which we've recently changed. But we're not necessarily looking for a quota. We're looking for meaningful ways to recruit young Liberals into positions where they can actually win, and they have the resources and the support and the guidance to be able to win win their ridings and turn them red. So we've shared the report with all of the leadership candidates, and if/when more come in, we'll continue sharing them, and are looking forward to meeting with them as well, alongside hopefully hosting a debate at some point as well.
I was gonna say, I think you guys should host a debate at some point with the candidates, because I think that would be very good. I was thinking that the whole time we were talking, I was like, they should do a debate. I do want to talk about policy issues beyond the party. So obviously the OIL is advocating for all these things within leadership within the party, but I think what people maybe don't know about the organization is that whether you vote Liberal or not as a young Liberal, you guys are advocating for young people just across the board and trying to strengthen issues on behalf of young people. You've mentioned OSAP, obviously. I was there when we had the debt-free tuition program, and that was something that I got to work on. So I feel probably equally as mad as you do about. Well, maybe less so, because I don't still have tuition bills. I did pay those off, but you guys are still paying for them. So you might be a bit more mad. But, there are these issues out there that young Liberals actually do fight for against the government all the time. It's not just because you're young Liberals. It is because you're young people passionate about these issues. Why is it so important for the OIL to put pressure on the government?
Yeah, I think it's it's really important that we find ways to support our caucus who puts pressure on the government, but it can't just be them, and it can't just be at Queen's Park. Realistically, how many people are really watching Question Period or watching debates? And obviously social media traction is definitely big, and some things do go viral, but with the OSAP protests, at least in recent years, I have not seen something come up on feeds so frequently. And these are, I would talk to, obviously I haven't done any like proper reporting on this, but take my word for it when, I speak to people who don't get political things on their feed and don't really engage with politics, through social media or through the digital world, who were getting those posts. And I think that's really because our youth wing and other groups outside of liberal politics as well really went hard on fighting the government on this one. And I know we haven't gone there, quite yet. We haven't succeeded in them overturning it yet. But our fight does continue. From the moment that they announced those changes, the next day we were ready to go with our petition. We were ready to go with post. We engaged all of our campus clubs, and this was a first for my executive. We had never organized to this extent before, and all of our club presidents immediately were on board during exam season or during midterms, I think it was. But people were very, very, very riled up about this, and I think it's really because you make everyday life in Ontario has become harder. But this was a really painful point, I think, for students, that if you want us to succeed and you want us to find jobs and you want us to, be able to contribute to the economy, how are we to do that if we don't have access to education or post-secondary education? And I think it was really hard for a lot of young people, and it will continue to be. And so not only, were we trying to amplify that and do protests and sign petitions, right now, I think the last I checked, we were nearing 18,000 signatures on the digital petition. But then we also had thousands and thousands and thousands of signatures that were part of the physical version that MPP Tyler Watt presented in the House. And those signatures came from across the province. We recruited so many new young Liberals from that too, who, didn't know what our movement was, didn't know what we were standing for. And this became, an issue for them. And I frankly think that if we keep up the pressure, it could become a ballot issue too, because it's, just because the summer's here, it doesn't mean people are going to stop feeling it. They're worried about how they're going to afford tuition in September. They're going to be worried about how they're going to afford tuition the next day or the next year. Sorry. People will drop out. And it's really devastating as a young person to see that at a time when we already feel like there are so many roadblocks for us to succeed and have a good life in Ontario, that this government has chosen to yet add another one.
I definitely feel for the current generation, because when I graduated from university, it was directly into the Great Recession. It was like 4 months later that rocked everything and, sort of destroyed the job market. And we have seen data that, if you are set back financially in those younger years, those initial earning years, you almost never catch up. And so that was my experience. And my generation has obviously struggled with housing as, a knock-on effect of that. Your generation now is having, at the time, like this is the pre-win period too. So we didn't have the generous tuition grants that, I was a part of in government. We had, at that time, it was the 30% off tuition grant, which did help. And we had capping of, maximum repayment and things like that. All of that helped. But you had hefty bills that I paid all the entire time I was in government. I was paying those off. I paid it off right as I ended government, just in time to go try and find another job. But this was the reality we're in, and you're in a similar reality where suddenly you're not getting supports to do the one thing that in theory is supposed to help you land the job that you need to be able to afford the house and blah, blah, blah. All the things Doug Ford is talking about all the time that he is undercutting with these policies. And you're doing it in an environment where AI is undercutting all the entry-level jobs that are out there. So I very much feel for you. I think you guys have it worse. It's rare that generations will say that to other generations, but I think you do have it worse.
Well, I hope I don't have to say that to the next generation is what I'm hoping.
Well, right, like we're supposed to be handing off better, right? But all of this makes me think about, this charge that youth are apathetic. And I'm like, well, I mean, you're entirely within your rights to be, because everything is terrible. But that's not the perspective I see. Like, I see people going out in droves for OSAP protests. I see them going out for climate protests. I see them organizing in their communities. It's not just protesting, but actually organizing people and trying to get things done and trying to push for legislation and all these things. And I just don't see, like, maybe at the voting booths, there's less youth coming out some of the time, but I think there's just a lot of different things going on. And I don't know that political parties are really engaging younger generations in the way that they want to be engaged, because, it turns out times change and you do need to change with the times when you're engaging with new generations of people. So is the problem, I think I know your answer. Is the problem that youth just don't care about politics, or is the problem that political leaders aren't really focused on the issues that youth are really concerned about and that are impacting them in their lives right now?
I think that's a good question. I've thought about this a lot. Before I got involved in partisan politics, I was trying to just organize in the nonpartisan space for, against youth apathy in politics. And I think there's a few reasons. Number one, if traditional politics shows us anything, it's that there's a lot of barriers for youth to participate and to, have a seat at the table. As we've talked about before, oftentimes you can be the only young person in the room, and that can only get you so far. It's not good enough to just have one person at the table, who oftentimes won't be heard and will be recognized as the youngest person at the table with sometimes the least experience. And so I think if young people don't feel like they have a say or don't feel empowered, whether it's in partisan politics or in politics in general, then why would they go out and vote? And why would they put in the time to volunteer or to help a local candidate, et cetera, if there isn't that faith and trust, and if there hasn't been enough effort put into showing young people that there is a space for them in politics. I think we can do that. We can do a lot of that on, at the OIL level. We can change a lot of that by bringing more young people into the fold. But as we've talked about, it can't just be us, and it cannot just be our commission. It has to be the broader party and the leader, and everyone who's involved at the local level or commission level, working together to bring out more young people and to show them that we actually have something to offer. One thing that I often think about is making sure that, what's the value proposition of being a young liberal? Why would I ask someone to join our movement, to volunteer their time, or, in some cases, even use, financial means to participate in politics if they aren't going to feel like they're heard? And I think it's my responsibility and our job as the OIL to identify those barriers and to communicate them up and to try to change them ourselves. I am lucky that I get the opportunity to try to change some of that at EC and bring those concerns up. But I think it's really about capitalizing on the issues like OSAP, like climate change, et cetera, like social justice issues, some of them that you've mentioned, but also showing young people that really everything we care about is political. Everything is connected to some form of government or some policy. And while it can be a painstaking system sometimes, we have to show them that there is a true value to being involved and to having a direct say in who's going to lead our party or different policy stances.
I think it's a really important point. Like, I think we think, oh, political, that's partisanship, or like, issues, whatever, like whatever way people frame it. Political just means collective decision making, right? And if you're not participating in it, you're being left out from those decisions. So I think you're right. Everything is political. And if you want to say in things and you don't want to have to gripe after the fact, you got to get involved. Your generation is probably the first one that has only done digital forward campaigns. I think we're at a point now where campaigns are largely digital first, and then obviously there is an in-person component and stuff, but the first touch is usually online, last touch is often online. And I'm just thinking back to my own experience. So I was a young liberal in 2008. I remember Twitter was just becoming something that you were campaigning on. And so I remember doing, scheduled tweets. We'd have like 5 a day or whatever it was. And I would do that stuff for the local campaign I was on. Then by 2011, I was at party headquarters, and we actually had there was the campaign, this was the old 10 St. Mary, and there's the two wings of the building. The far wing of the building was about like, I think 30 or 40 people just doing social media because it was the new thing in 2011. Then you get to 2014. I don't know if I can even remember what we were doing in 2014. I think we were doing a lot of video. Then by 2018, I remember the OYL specifically coming up with a Snapchat strategy. Then fast forward to, you know, the last couple of elections, it's TikTok, then maybe WhatsApp, a lot of more message-based organizing. Things, the point being, everything has changed. Things are a little different, and a lot of the tactics that parties deploy still seem, I always joke, it's like, oh, that's from 2003. Like everything seems, you know, pre-Great Recession, pre-AI, pre-pandemic. Like parties don't seem to be able to turn into the future very, very quickly, or, you know, be able to engage with new generations of people with tactics that aren't, you know, outdated and inaccessible. So how should parties be adapting to this new era that is very youth driven, tech savvy, all those kinds of things? How should they be adapting to it? Because I don't know that we have seen a lot of that perhaps from, you know, the senior levels of political parties yet.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, you know, I also think to some extent, us as the OIL are also learning in that space, even though we are a board of young people. And I think it's a new change for everyone to kind of adapt to the sort of digital media world, and how much that can drive campaigns. And I think it's really important to have people who know about analytics and algorithms. And, you know, it's not my complete cup of tea, but I know it's important to have someone who can do that, because, you know, when it comes to sort of digital campaigning tactics, we can either get on the train and do it safely and learn how to implement it into our party in a way that is supportive of the most vulnerable, or we can completely miss it and get left behind. Because while, you know, I don't think that all parties have really done a great job at this, I think we can see that some parties do put a lot in digital advertising. And I know obviously, you know, there's differences in our fundraising abilities between, you know, us and the other parties, but nonetheless, having a really strong digital strategy is very important, because again, all of the amazing work that our caucus does at Queen's Park only will get so far if we don't put it through the right channels and get it on the right feeds, and find creative ways to get it to broader audiences, and not just the politicos who are very tuned into the party, because that's not what's going to win us, you know, get us the next win in the election, and or get us government back. And even when, you know, when we do get into government too, I think things will be very different than they were before. And the world is moving very fast, and I think it's very tough to keep up with how fast things are progressing. But we should be, and you know, our new leader, our next leader, I think, should also really be thinking about ways to capitalize on the digital world, so that we don't get left behind.
One other thing I want to talk about youth voters is this idea of youth quakes. So every so often there's an election where young people come out in droves. So we saw this at the federal level. Youth vote share went up, I think, 10% in the 2025 campaign. And, you know, that also did reflect the vote going up at all age groups, because suddenly we had this really, really important election that people cared about. Is that why there was such a big increase? Like we saw this in 2015 too. There was a big increase in federal vote intention for young people in that election. Is it just a case of youth kind of see politics as just the status quo, not really relevant until perhaps a big election comes and they see, hey, we can actually make a difference here? Why do you think the turnout was bigger this time? Why is it sometimes lower? What do you think is going on with youth turnout?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I'm no expert, but my sort of read on it is that I think there was a lot at stake. And obviously there was for everyone with, you know, what's happening down south and the tariff war at the time of the last election. But I really do think there are so many different aspects where people are struggling. And there was a very big election where you could kind of decide, you know, the path of where our country was going to go. And I think it was really important for young people to show up. I think they were shown that value proposition of showing up, of, you know, what happens when you go to the polls and how your vote can quite literally, you know, change a seat or change a riding, or be the reason why someone won. And I think it's that high voter turnout or higher youth voter turnout last time that we need to capitalize on as well. Looking at issues like OSAP and healthcare and housing and really showing young people what the provincial government's role is in all of these, I think can also help us drive and increase that turnout. But we need to keep getting through to people and keep showing them that this is a very, very important election. I do think a bit of the snap election piece gets more buzz too. It was in the news and everywhere, but I also do really think that as the digital world is progressing and people can access a lot more information at their fingertips, that is also a really big way we can get through to people.
I think you're right that one of the important things is obviously engaging with that vote after the fact, because I think people vote in droves and then they see maybe things don't happen or they don't get engaged with the game. We see this with leadership races in the party, right? Like people get involved and then they're like, oh, and then I never heard from the party again. So obviously that follow-up is a key part of that, and seeing some actual results for their choices. I know there's been studies done that if a young voter votes in their first 3 elections, they become lifelong voters. So it's an incredibly important part of ensuring that we have voters going forward. I do want to take the flip here, which is talking about Gen Z as candidates, because we talk all the time about engaging them as voters, but there's actually a lot of leaders in this generation who could be actually serving in government or in opposition or whatever it is, but serving on Parliament Hill, Queen's Park, wherever it is across the country. And we know that is happening actually federally. There are 4 Gen Z members as a Gen Z caucus. We had one of them on this podcast earlier. Obviously, one of the recent by-elections was focused on one of them as well. And I've been following them. I think they do really interesting things. Some of them have like really funny videos that I just think are really engaging and like breaking the mold of what politicians normally do online. And I think that's really interesting. How important is it for parties to start engaging younger generations as candidates? We talked about 30 under 30 before, which was a program I got to work on, and even just, the OIL Fly Fund, going to those kind of candidates. How important is building up that infrastructure to support those candidates, recruit those candidates, and how important is it just to have them there, to have their voice around the cabinet table or the caucus table?
No, absolutely. I think that's really important, and we have a couple of members of our caucus who are former Young Liberals, or for example, like MPP John Sow or MPP Tyler Water. We're very supportive of of that fact as well, of having young candidates, and the rest of our caucus for that matter too. But I think really having young caucus members, whether it's on the federal or provincial side, it shows young people that they can have a seat at the same table as decision makers, and that you can go beyond just using your vote as a mechanism to create change, but that you actually deserve a seat and can have a seat at the same table as the prime minister, at the same table as the premier, or the leader for us. And I think that's very, very valuable. I've gone to hear the quote unquote Gen Z caucus speak a couple of times, and it's been great because the way that they interact with young people is different than the way other members will. And it's not their fault that they engage differently, but it's just that being in that same age bracket does I think naturally bring in some more young people. And when it comes to recruiting young people as candidates, I really do think that we all know that in the last couple of weeks before the RIP period, as we're scrambling, or sometimes the last couple of months, I should say, maybe not the weeks, but when we do really need to find folks. We can look to some young people to support in that way, but I think it should be a very intentional part of the next leader's recruitment strategy of and I'm not saying you say that certain ridings have to have young candidates. I don't, frankly, personally don't think that that really works, and causes maybe sometimes more harm than good, but we need to be intentional with how we are going to give young people the opportunity to engage in our space to potentially become candidates. And if they do become candidates, for them to have the resources that they need to be successful, and not just to be put in a riding for the sake of it, or for to count as one of the 30, for example. And so, I think that won't happen overnight. And that's something that we think about even now. We're a couple of years out from, hopefully, a couple of years out from the next provincial election. And we're thinking about that. We created an election readiness director position the first term that I became president, and we had that constitutional amendment and it passed. And that position is specifically dedicated to making sure that we are ready for the next election. Now, the first person who was in that position got an election pretty soon because of the SNAP one. But generally, this person will be responsible for making sure that we can engage and help the party find ways to recruit young people as candidates as well, and show them that they have a space. But we have to be very intentional, and we have to not do it in a performative manner. So I think it's a difficult task, but it's definitely one that we should be putting our focus towards.
I think the election readiness person is a great idea. I don't think I've seen an OIL have that role before. So, another innovation for your era in power there. I could talk to you about youth politics forever, but we are clocking in at quite a few number of minutes now. So I do want to get to my last question, which is, I always try and end on a positive note and with, an idea of what listeners can do going forward. So if you were to give advice to a young person who wants to get involved in politics but doesn't know where to start, what would that advice be?
My advice would root from that one experience that I had of being scared of walking into a room full of young liberals. So my advice would be, no matter how worried or scared or intimidated you are, go into the room, find people who are, who are supportive, who are like-minded, find the good parts of politics, and really create a space for yourself. And that'll look different for everyone. And I, really, really do think that this is one of the most powerful ways that we can make a difference, is getting involved in politics, whether it's partisan politics or not. And showing people that no matter how young you are, you have a voice, and you should always be at the decision-making table, regardless.
Well, I think that is a great note to end on. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Progress Canada, presented by Lightbulb Narrative, a Canadian-owned company specializing in strategic communications, narrative development, and content creation. Our music today was composed by Elliot Middleton. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing to access future episodes the moment they drop. Thanks for listening.